Dr. Bosta. That was beautiful. We have one more speaker left for the afternoon, Dr. Peter McCullough. We want to say thank you so much for flying in from Texas today and hitting the ground running literally to be here to speak to us. We really appreciate that. I'm going to introduce Dr. McCullough. He is an internist, cardiologist, and epidemiologist who has been a fearless leader in the medical response to the COVID-19 pandemic. He is one of the most published cardiologists in his specialty worldwide. He has also published extensively on the topic of early outpatient treatment of SARS-CoV-2 infection using a sequenced multi-drug approach to avoid hospitalization and death. He has commented extensively on the pandemic medical response in The Hill, America Out Loud, ABC, Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, Victory Channel, and a multitude of independent media outlets. He has testified on several occasions in the U.S. Senate and congressional committees. Dr. McCullough's message to lawmakers and the media has always been the urgent necessity to treat high-risk patients early and aggressively in order to avoid hospitalization and death. His conviction has been guided by his Hippocratic oath to treat the sick to the best of his ability and judgment. Unfortunately, his work has not been well received by the public health authorities or the medical center at which he has held a high-ranking position. He lost employment at a medical institution and professorships at several universities in Texas. He was also removed from multiple positions within the pharmaceutical industry, the NIH, and medical societies. All of these punitive actions were taken without courtesy communications or due process. He was later sued by his former institution for a temporary restraining order to effectively silence him in the media. In spite of suffering these penalties, Dr. McCullough has continued his academic and clinical efforts in combating SARS-CoV-2, for which he has reviewed thousands of reports and participated in several scientific congresses. He is now among the world's foremost experts on COVID-19. Dr. McCullough, thank you for the time and travel and for being with us here today.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you. What a great welcome. Thank you so much. Terrific welcome. I never in my life could have imagined that an introduction would contain basically a series of strippings of professional accolades going away and a lawsuit announced. I mean, what type of world are we in? It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And it's great to be among you. It's great to reunite with Dr. Cole and join the great people of Idaho. I haven't been here in a long time, but it's a terrific place. I ran the marathon in Coeur d'Alene. I ran the marathon here, and in my younger years, I hit a midlife crisis, and I ended up running a marathon in every state in the United States. And I did it in 8 years. And it was part of a journey of weight loss and personal reclamation. And so I remember the Idaho trip with great fondness. As introduced, I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm a practicing internist and cardiologist in Dallas, Texas. I did lose my job with one employer in the major medical center. I just went to another employer, and I didn't miss a beat. And I see patients and look after patients in my clinical practice, and as well as an academic scholar. I have published over 650 papers in the peer-reviewed literature. Typically 25 gets to be professor of medicine. I am in the area of interface between heart and kidney disease. I'm the most published person in my field in the world in history. When COVID-19 hit, I redirected my scholarship and my energies to do everything I could to help as many people as possible. That's what it was about. And what you're hearing today is something has happened over the last 3 years. Something has come down on this earth where the human mind is not thinking correctly. Things have become unmoored. Realities have changed. And it's not just this infection, it's actions around it. There is a relatively sudden and disturbing trend of gender ambiguity. This is all happening at once. It's all happening at once. I was stunned to learn that the American Medical Association announced in 2021 that doctors should no longer be putting gender assignments on birth certificates after doing this for the millennia. Suddenly, we cannot tell man from woman, boy from girl. Suddenly. It was okay 5 years ago, but we can't do it now. Something has come onto the minds of people, and it came in this context of a global medical emergency. Next slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 talking points. So if you had talking points, you get on an elevator, and you're going to try to make your impact. I'll give you 5 things to hang on to. And I want to extend to each and every one of you a copy of our book, Courage to Face COVID-19, Preventing Hospitalizations and Deaths While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex. It's up on the slide that you can see here. Now, we have copies in the table in the back of the room, the back corner here, and I've signed them all, but what may not be enough for everyone. So if during the course of this lecture, if you want to quietly kind of navigate over there and pick up your copy before they're all gone, that's perfectly fine to do so. And no, it's fine, really. I'm seriously, it's fine to do so as long as people are, respectful. And then for others, it's obviously available on Amazon, or you can order it through the website. But it tells this complex, mind-blowing reality of what's going on in the setting of a narrative, a story. And it's a well-written story. It's the only book in this space that's written by a best-selling author. So it's written by a pro, John Leake. That's all he does. And it tells the story about how this happened through my eyes, the eyes of other key people, what we did. Why did we do what we did to try to save as many lives as possible? How did Dr. Cole and I arrive at the same sets of conclusions independently without knowing each other? How did that happen? And Didier Rialto in France, and leaders all over the world. How did that happen? Why did the White House call me in the middle of a clinic one day in the U.S. Senate, and it kept going and going? How did Dr. Cole and I actually end up sitting next to each other in a 5-hour U.S. Senate testimony called COVID-19 a Second Opinion? We were giving a second opinion for our public health officials that work for us. He emphasized it. Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, the Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, the White House coordinator, Dr. Jha, they work for us. They were asked to show up, and they didn't. They didn't. You're going to meet in this meeting Mr. Ernesto Ramirez. He's here. He was on my flight. He recently went to Washington on his own dime with a group of parents and families and others who had sustained injuries and disabilities and sadly deaths that occurred due to the COVID-19 vaccine, to meet with FDA officials. And the FDA officials did not have the decency, the integrity, the compassion to show up and face them face to face. They asked Ernesto and his group to go into a conference room in the hotel in Washington to get on a Zoom so they could stay in Washington elsewhere on a Zoom. Let history record the shame, the depravity, the corruption, the malfeasance, the wrongdoing by those in position of authority. Let's call it. Let's call it. They work for us. This country is ours, not theirs. They work for us. . Everything that we've laid out for you is in the Senate record now. There have been 4 sets of U.S. Senate hearings. It started with Pierre Corey, and it was about inpatient care and the importance of corticosteroids. And then the second one was led by myself, Dr. Harvey Risch, and George Fareed, and it dealt with the advent of early treatment. And the second one solidified early treatment. Jean-Jacques Rochter from Florida, who had published the largest and most successful study of inpatient ivermectin in one of the best journals, Chest. Again, Dr. Corey was back, and there were others. We learned about other drugs under consideration. Dr. Ray Askewy, cardiologist at Johns Hopkins. And then the final one, Dr. Cole, myself, and others, I co-moderated with Ron Johnson. America has seen its best and brightest physicians who had the courage to face the illness, treat patients, get them through it, and then give a fair appraisal of the COVID-19 vaccines. And this second testimony include vaccine developers, consultants, people who this was their work. It also included nurses who told about inpatient care and patients who also told their testimonies, and attorneys. We were in the Kennedy caucus room. This is in the history books. And this isn't the only place it happened. We have been to multiple state senates and houses of lawmakers, houses of commons. We've been there. It's in the books. I am telling you, something is going on in the context of this medical emergency that is so fundamentally wrong. I was at a conference in Washington, and it was a scientific conference. It was led by Scott Atlas, who a lot of you know on Fox News. He's in my frequent contributor group in Fox News, but Scott was there. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, people from the NIH, people from industry, the media. A scientific meeting, and we are going over pandemic response. And in this meeting, for the first time, and I have been to hundreds, if not over 1,000 scientific meetings, I can tell you for the first time, I heard the word in a scientific meeting, and the word was evil. In a scientific meeting, it was evil. This was stunning. Next slide. I'm going to follow this outline. I don't have a large number of slides. They're available to you, by the way. All my slides completely available to anybody who wants to use them. But I'll make a few points with respect to each one of these bullets. Next slide. The top U.S. health agency, the CDC, now admits to major mistakes during the COVID-19 pandemic response. Dr. Cole already told you, Deborah Birx, who was on the White House task force, came out and said that she knew the vaccines weren't going to work. She also said that the majority of people in the hospital were fully vaccinated with Omicron. She said it. Now, Rochelle Lewinsky, in charge of the CDC, said we made large mistakes and we need to own them. I was on the news incessantly through the course of the pandemic, and one time I was on Laura Ingraham, and this was over a year ago, and I said, Laura, I think they're running about 9 months behind. Now I'd upgrade it and say they're running 15 months behind, maybe 2 years behind in terms of all the truths that I'm going to tell you, they've basically capitulated on. Far too late. Far too many Americans have suffered based on their delay in rapidly assimilating the information and getting revisions out to Americans. People have asked me, what errors did the CDC commit? I said, first and foremost, the CDC never should have given any recommendations on contagion control. They should never have made recommendations on masks or social distancing. That's not in their wheelhouse. The second thing the CDC never should have done is make any recommendations on the vaccines or been a sponsor of the vaccine program. That's not in their wheelhouse. They actually have no experience in recommending or not recommending or administering an emergency use authorized vaccine. They don't. What does the CDC do? And they do a good job at their domain of activity. They do outbreak investigation, and they do data analytics. That's what they do. I was in Dallas. We had an Ebola outbreak. It was at Presbyterian Hospital. I'm at the next hospital down. They came into Dallas. They did a terrific job. They organized things. They helped an outbreak investigation before things got out of control in Dallas, Texas. I give them great credit. I give them great care. I was just on Steve Bannon this week, and Steve said that. He goes, isn't the CDC kind of a crackerjack team, and they do great things? I said, yes, they do. I went to Baylor University undergrad, University of Texas Southwestern, graduated top of my class, was the first person in Texas to go to University of Washington in Seattle for in the last 10 years. I went to UW because it's the top place around, just ahead of Harvard, and many people in my class became CDC officers. That's kind of the top gun people in medicine. They are people of great skill. Something has happened now. From the time of Ebola outbreak in Dallas, Texas, to managing this SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, something has happened. And from the top of the CDC, there is an admission that large mistakes have been made. Next slide. The first mistake they made is they did not readily adopt a reasonable assumption, ultimately proven, that there was negligible spread of the virus. This is very important. Respiratory illnesses spread from a sick person to a susceptible person. A sick, febrile tuberculosis patient coughs and someone susceptible gets it. A sick influenza person coughs or sneezes and a susceptible person gets it. Respiratory illnesses have never simply spread from one person shooting like a laser beam to someone else with no symptoms. But yet a false narrative was crafted early on. There were papers written about this. There were models that assumed 50% of the spread occurred. People were just shooting the virus at each other asymptomatically. You're laughing about it, but that was the genesis of this false narrative. It was in the medical literature. The CDC was promoting this. Yeah, and incredulously, I was looking at this as a doctor. I practiced internal medicine and cardiology, and I asked myself, since when? How does this happen? Dallas, we're kind of landlocked. We don't have any water, but there is a nice lake, White Rock Lake, and people were wearing masks. One guy in White Rock Lake on one side, and 3 miles on the other side, another guy was wearing a mask, as if they could shoot it to each other across the lake. Next slide. These two papers were published in 2020, very high-quality papers. The first one was published from the Chinese, 10 million Chinese, and then the second one by Zachary Madewell. They concluded with very, very detailed sampling, case contact tracing, airtight. These papers have never been refuted. Less than 1% of all spread could be classified from someone being asymptomatic, and largely as people who are just starting to come down with it. It doesn't happen. This is so important. This means we never needed to lock down. This means the only people who needed to go home were people who were sick, which we do anyway. That means we never needed to social distance. We never needed to shut down churches. We never needed to shut down places of employment. We shut down our operating rooms. We shut down our heart catheterization laboratories. All for nothing. All for a false assumption. A false assumption. It doesn't spread asymptomatically. It just simply doesn't. Next slide. That means that asymptomatic testing is not supportable. If it doesn't spread asymptomatically, then we don't need to test for it asymptomatically, and the FDA agrees. The US FDA has never cleared a single nasal swab, a PCR or antigen test, oral nasal, for asymptomatic testing. Never. Never. The FDA doesn't approve tests, but they clear tests. They never cleared such a test. Never. In June of 2021, because of this kind of rogue activity of people being forced to do asymptomatic testing, the World Health Organization came out and said, stop this asymptomatic testing. In June of 2021. Yet, employer after employer, sports team after sports team, military, travel, this practice of asymptomatic testing continued. It actually got worse with the rapid antigen testing. It started to go nuts. It went nuts. Next slide. This paper from the NCAA Division I student athletes at 12 institutions shows you, look at the bottom line, among the athletes, the rate of ever getting a positive test was 0.44%. The general student population, it was 0.88%. Who at these universities made this decision to do asymptomatic testing? One of the things you'll find very interesting about mandates, no one knows who decided, and nobody stands up and said, it was my idea. Not a single dean, not a single university president, not a single provost. Where is the accountable person to tell us why they did this? Any one of you have any one of these decisions, testing at your employment, even if it was in the past, or a vaccine that you had to take, go ask some questions. Who made the decision? Keep going. Who made the decision? It's almost ghost-like. The people making these decisions know they're wrong. That's the reason why they won't stand up and raise their hands. They know they're wrong. This is very important. Go hunt them. Go hunt them. They deserve it. They deserve it. This is very important. Listen, these people would be the first people to say that they're announcing a charitable campaign to raise more money for the university. They'll be the first one to get behind that. They'll be the first one to say that there's a new a sales initiative at the company. But they won't say, well, I'm the one accountable for the vaccine or the testing. This lack of accountability is a sign. It's a sign of cowardice. It's a sign of people knowing that they're wrong. It's a sign of human uncertainty. It's a sign somehow in people's minds they actually want to hurt other people. Next slide. This paper, workplace, huge number of employees. Why are they testing 36-year-old people on average? Look at the rates of positive tests, way less than 1%. And when it's positive, the majority are false positives. It's a complete waste of time. Reject asymptomatic testing. It's not FDA cleared. You know, in the end, it's going to be so interesting because the FDA is going to say, you know what, we never cleared it. We never said to do that. Finally, the CDC came out August 11th. Their CDC was relatively silent on this and said we shouldn't do asymptomatic testing. You know, more than a year after the WHO says it. Why is the CDC not even in sync with the WHO? That is interesting. Next slide. Third point, natural immunity protects against severe disease. Now, natural immunity means that if you've already had the respiratory infection. So let's see a show of hands. How many people here have had COVID? About 95%. So this is a close-knit community. I had a group of a different group in a different venue, and it was about half. I was a little surprised. But in the Texas Senate, I testified on June 27th of 2022. And the dean for the University of Texas at Houston School of Public Health, using a high-grade research assay for the receptor binding domain of the spike protein, got up and testified with a huge sample in Texas with great confidence that the seroprevalence of positive antibodies using this assay was 99%. 99%. Everybody has either had it or been sufficiently exposed to it and may not have clinically manifest disease. It's made its run through the population. It's already run through the population. This is very important. Now, through wild type to alpha and beta, gamma, and delta, the immunity was almost perfect. It was nearly impossible to get it a second time. We heard sporadic reports. You know, I went on Joe Rogan. I said, Joe, we've already had it. We're good. You know, we were sitting in this man cave. And then it was about 2 days later, the news broke that Omicron broke through natural immunity. And immediately people were tweeting, Dr. McCullough, how could you say you can't get it twice and you got it? And sure enough, a few days later, I got it myself when my kids came home and brought it home for Christmas. And so Omicron broke through natural immunity. But for Spanish flu, it took about 2 years for it to make its run through the population. And SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, has made its run through the population. Now, there are some populations that are behind us. So worldwide, there's going to be a lot more. Do you know many of the Asian countries have still yet to have it in great degrees? The Philippines, many of the East Asian countries. It just hasn't made its run yet. So we'll have certainly more COVID-19 worldwide, but you'll hear a talking point. In fact, Rochelle Lewinsky had a talking point the other day. She said, do you know that there's 400 people a day dying of COVID-19? Have you heard that talking point? That's where we are right now. We know based on CDC data and very good data from Italy that when it's adjudicated, 10% of those cases is really COVID pneumonia, that in fact that's really the killer. And then 90% of cases, it's either coincident test positive patients that are test positive for other reasons, or they have other significant contributors. So there are people who come in with acute myocardial infarction and they test positive. At my center, the test positivity of women delivering babies is run 5% to 15% almost all the way through. When someone has COVID-19, they intermittently test positive for months afterwards. That's another reason not to get another test. So if you come in for an ankle sprain 6 months after you've had COVID, it's possible you're going to be positive. In fact, the NIH study has shown that the virus is there in the body at a low level. You're going to express it. Okay, so this idea that it's 500 or 600 or 400 cases a day dying of COVID-19, the reality is 40. It's 40. Now, it's 40 too many because they all could have been saved with an early treatment protocol. Okay, but let's put it in context. It's probably about 600 fentanyl deaths per day. The opioid pandemic and drugs running across the border right now are a much bigger public health threat than COVID-19. And the data support it. Next slide. Scott Atlas, who was in the White House task force for a period of time, he's in my frequent contributor group at Fox. Scott and I are actually going to be in Des Moines, Iowa together coming up next month, said the denial of natural immunity by our Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services in this vaccine mandate is unprecedented in modern history. What he was saying is all the doctors and nurses and people like us who have already had COVID, to ask them to take a vaccine is unethical, it's immoral, and from a clinical perspective, it's essentially illegal. It's essentially illegal. It's not good medical practice, it's not medically necessary, and it's not clinically indicated. I had COVID-19 early in 2020. So when the vaccines rolled out at my hospital, they busily set out the tables out in the lobby. My office was on the ground floor. I could go right out into the lobby. I started getting texts, we're ready to give you your vaccine. I said, I already had COVID. Too late for a vaccine. The clinical trials and the FDA, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, specifically excluded patients who had previously taken COVID, who already had COVID. They're excluded from taking a vaccine. The only reason why we ever exclude patients from clinical trials is because we expect no benefit and we expect excessive harm. And boy, was that right, because all the studies show of someone who's already had COVID and they take a vaccine, they are going to be harmed at a higher rate. That's been shown. Raw, Kramer, and Mathudius, 3 papers that shown it. It is a giant mistake to have COVID and then take a vaccine from the very beginning. And I think those first early days where the response was on the text, well, why don't you take one anyway? When that started to happen, for the first time, that was December of 2020, I knew something was off. I said, wait a minute, they're actually going to give the vaccine to people who had already recovered. And then within a few days, I learned something even worse. I learned that our vaccine program and everyone's vaccine program was actively encouraging pregnant women to take the vaccine. Now, pregnant women and women of childbearing potential who couldn't guarantee contraception were actively excluded from the clinical trials program because we never, ever apply, administer, or give a new medicine or a new product with no testing to a pregnant woman. Never. We don't even use usual things until we have a very long period of time to know it's not going to harm the mother or the fetus. But in the first week of the vaccine program nationwide, over 3,000 women had actually been taking a vaccine. So I knew something was very wrong. I knew that those giving out the vaccine were making a giant, giant mistake. I can tell you as a doctor and a health professional, I would never do that. Never. I would never allow that. Never, with a capital N. I knew something else. I knew the mothers doing this were making a giant mistake. Remember, these mothers, they won't drink a drop of alcohol. They won't even eat soft cheese or drink green tea. But at the onset of a suggestion or an encouragement, they will go out and take an injection of the genetic code for a lethal protein engineered by U.S. researchers in a biosecurity lab level 4 in Wuhan, China. An American pregnant woman would walk up and take the genetic code for a lethal protein. Stunning. Stunning. And even if you could say we didn't know it was lethal back then, we knew it wasn't good, and we certainly knew it was novel. And yet pregnant women did that. I can tell you at that point in time, I started to understand, December 2020, people actually lost their minds. They lost their minds. Next slide. Fast forward, this paper from Qatar, Kemateli and colleagues, this is an important paper. Actually, those in the Middle East have done a great job. Arrow forward to show the build here. Go ahead and hit next slide, or arrow forward. Yeah, in this paper, a primary infection, having COVID-19, like all of you in the room, you have 97% protection against hospitalization and death with the next infection. 97%. That includes nursing home patients, the most feeble patients, people on oxygen, people like you in the room. You have no risks as you move out there. None. And there was no waning of this. The observation period was 15 months. This is a bazillion times better than any vaccine. And do you know this checkbox of did you have COVID? The most important public health checkbox of all time. Do you know the CDC is not keeping track of this? Do you know on their vaccine adverse event reporting system, the form that we fill out for vaccine injuries, there's no checkbox to ask if they had COVID. The most important factor that probably determines who's going to be damaged to the vaccines, the CDC is not asking about. I got called by pro sports teams. They said, Dr. McCullough, what should we do? I said, why don't you keep track of who's had COVID? Are you doing that now? No. I said, how do you know who the A team is going to be or the B team is going to be? You know, college teams didn't keep track of this. Pro football didn't. Pro hockey didn't. The U.S. military didn't. How do they know who their Delta Force is? They're going to send a bunch of guys over and get sick altogether? Think about the oblivion, the blunder, the absolute incompetency of major organizations. Scott Atlas's book that he has out about this cloud over America that's happened in the White House, a lot of it's about incompetency. That is a complete, there's nothing to describe it. It's complete ineptitude. I work in a large cardiology practice, the largest one in Dallas-Fort Worth. About every 6 months, we have a status form that comes out. It says, have you had the illness? Yeah, I've had it. Why do we ask? We're trying to outfit offices. We don't want an entire office to go down. We have to staff stenographers, technicians, doctors, nurses. Any reasonable organization would ask that question. If you want to know how to run your business, now everybody's been through it, it's relatively a moot point. But my Lord, even the NFL didn't ask. Yet they were all over these vaccines. Aaron Rodgers recently went on Joe Rogan. You heard him, right? You're laughing. You probably watched Joe Rogan. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers basically described this incredible vaccine discrimination that he had. And then finally he gets through COVID. And there's, you know, he basically said that they were following the wrong thing. Next slide. So the fifth point here is COVID-19 has always been a treatable illness. Always been true. So for those of you who had COVID-19, how many of you took some form of treatment at home to get through the illness? Okay, I'd say probably 70% of the 90%, which is fine. That's right. We estimate that probably 25% of the adult population really would need something to get through the illness. Okay, next slide. These are the two papers that I helped publish, and boy, looking back, this may be the most important out of my 650 papers I've published, are these two, but they were outlining this rationale of why we should treat early, Why we shoot early. The one on the left was published August 7th of 2020, and we submitted it about 6 weeks ahead of time. I am telling you, within 3 months of the pandemic, and on the paper on the left, there's UCLA, there is Yale, there are major academic medical centers, major centers in Italy, because Italians had a lot more experience than we did. That paper on the left is still the most downloaded and read paper in the American Journal of Medicine for the last 3 years. The one on the right was in the journal that I formerly edited, Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine, and has the same status. These are important papers because they told the world we can and we should treat patients. The principles were, next slide, here. We took the precautionary principle. We didn't say everybody had to be treated, but a small group of high-risk patients, because this is a mass casualty event. We can't wait for large randomized trials. A large randomized trial, I know because I do them. In cardiology, it's 20,000 to 40,000 patients. That's what we did with COVID-19. These trials could have been done. They were done for vaccines, but we needed them for treatment. And the trials weren't planned, they weren't organized, and it was clear they weren't coming. What we needed is we needed an evaluation of all the available data, the smaller studies, the non-randomized studies, and all we needed to do is see a signal of benefit. Did a drug look like it did something favorable? And did it have acceptable safety? Is it going to be safe? Something we've already used before. That's all we needed. And then we knew we needed drugs in combination. We knew this. We used 2 drugs for a serious staph infection. We knew this wasn't going to be a single drug to treat the fatal infection. Next slide. These were the 3 major phases of the illness that we identified early: viral replication, cytokine injury or inflammation, and then thrombosis, blood clotting. And it was a long illness at the time. Through alpha through delta, it was a long illness, about 30 days. Mortality started to go up at 14 days. Everything here is depicted correctly. There's the characteristic signs and symptoms, the test results, etc. But the point is, when the oxygen saturation is going down, that's actually when micro blood clots are in the lungs. When the oxygen saturation is going down, that's not time for an antiviral, that's time for an anticoagulant. I can tell you, when the National Institutes of Health came out with their first set of guidelines it was in October of 2020, they actually could not conceptualize and did not conceptualize the illness correctly. They didn't. There's nothing in the document by the NIH suggesting they actually understood what was going on. There was also no one in the NIH guidelines that professed to even see a patient with COVID-19 and understand what was going on. The Infectious Disease Society of America had a whole series of guidelines, but they all specifically applied to inpatient care. They didn't even address this giant domain of people getting sick. And I think the biggest blunder of all is when we look at SARS-CoV-2, and if I asked any one of you, what are you really worried about with this infection? You would say 2 things. I don't want to be hospitalized and I don't want to die. If I could get through this at home, I'd be okay. Everyone's shaking their head, right? Do you know we went through 2 presidents, 2 White House task force, 2 CDC directors, a single NIAID director, endless press briefings, write-ups. Not a single leader could identify the problem. The problem was Americans were being hospitalized and dying with COVID-19. The solution is get some doctors in Washington who know how to treat the illness, and let's stop these hospitalizations and deaths. No one could articulate the problem. No one could. And I think that's what's even a greater enigma is former President Trump gets COVID early. He's over 70. He's overweight. He gets letter-perfect treatment. He gets treatment by Sean Conley. Great guy. He got monoclonal antibodies. He got drugs in combination. He got steroids. He gets through it. You would think our President of the United States, getting the gift of getting through COVID, would step out and say, you know what? I want every senior citizen to be treated like I was. Can you imagine if he had the integrity and he had the compassion and he had the insight and he had the decency to say that? Can you imagine? What a shortcoming. What a shortcoming. What a walk of shame that is. That is a walk of shame. And his successor's worse. We have two presidents right now that are walking a line. Two presidents. One of them wants to come back. Trump wants to come back. He's walking a line. He's walking a line. And that line is one that cannot be pursued without a giant apology. A giant apology. Almost an on his knees apology. He needs to apologize to 1 million families that lost their loved ones and 10 million people unnecessarily hospitalized because he did not get behind early treatment. He made a whimper about hydroxychloroquine. Not good enough. Not good enough. Not good enough to face me, I'm telling you right now. That is a shameful position that our two presidents took, and the president and the prime ministers of every major country in the world. They weren't alone. They weren't alone. None of them stepped out and said, treat our citizens with early treatment and let's stop this thing. Nobody did. Nobody did. And when I asked people, I said, what were they thinking? What were they thinking? You know the word I hear? They were afraid. The word fear and afraid come up all the time. What are they afraid of? They were afraid. Our responses up top were intracellular anti-infectives, corticosteroids, and then antiplatelet, antithrombotics. Next slide. This is the protocol. I'm not going to go through it. Suffice it to say, you've been through it. It involves risk stratification. Low-risk people can get through the illness now. The CDC says 5 days, come back to work, you're fine. If you're exposed to it at work, you don't have to quarantine. People higher risk can go down through a sequence of treatments. Monoclonal antibodies now phased out. We can use, everyone's had a hyper focus on the antivirals, but yet our South American and South African colleagues treat the entire syndrome. No antiviral, no hydroxy, no ivermectin. It's not needed. There has been a way exaggerated, over enthusiasm for antivirals. The virus itself doesn't tear things up nearly as much as the inflammation and the blood clotting. So that's been a big mistake. Everyone wanted to get incredibly juiced up over hydroxychloroquine, which was used during the first year of the pandemic to a great degree. Second year of pandemic, ivermectin. Ivermectin just took some time to find the dose and duration. And now the third year of the pandemic, Paxlovid and molnupiravir. I was on ABC. They actually came to Dallas and they wanted to shoot a documentary clip, and they wanted to get all juiced up about ivermectin. I said, listen, ivermectin's terrific. I use it. I do think it's a very dynamic drug. It's got great data. I said, but you know, the biggest thing is people not getting any treatment. Not getting any treatment. And I think the news clip that came out of this, which I was not disappointed about, I said, listen, if someone shows up to the ER and they ask for hydroxychloroquine and they got turned down, I said it'd be fine if they got ivermectin. But if they got turned down on ivermectin too, I said Paxlovid would be fine. And if they got turned down on that, I'd say molnupiravir would be fine. But if they got sent home with nothing, I wouldn't be okay with that. And that's the point. It takes about 4 to 6 drugs used in a sequence combination. It turns out, actually, the over-the-counter nutraceuticals and supplements play a big role. That's actually a very good thing. You can control a lot of that. We put in that yellow box, that narrow yellow box, if you can see it, it's called the OTC, over-the-counter bundle. There are things you can get over the counter. Do you know in some countries, they are starving for anything? There's a complete blockade of anything that can help people. We chronicle this in our book. This was from the very beginning. This was from the very, very beginning. I told Tucker Carlson in early April of 2021 in Queensland, Australia, they put on the books that a doctor will go to jail if he or she prescribes hydroxychloroquine. And Tucker, you know, great journalist, you know what he asked? He goes, how did they know? He goes, the research wasn't done yet. That is interesting. Do you know YouTube put in its community rules that there could be no mention of hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, that was going to violate the community? How did they know? How did they know to put that in their community rules? In France, about 6 months before the pandemic, they took ivermectin from over the counter and they made a prescription. 6 months before the virus ever was known about. How did they know? So my co-author, John Leake, gets into this. How did they know? But I can tell you from the very beginning, there was deep knowledge that there were many things that we could do to treat the illness. This is so important that we actually added a chapter in our book about nasal virucidal washes. Next slide. What we learned is that the first 3 days of treatment, no matter what we do, is the most important. This paper by Fazio and colleagues, I worked on this with the Italians, and this was no hydroxy and no ivermectin. This was much more an antihistamine, corticosteroid, and a coagulant-based protocol. But first 3 days is everything. Next slide. This nasal virucidal washes, why did we write a chapter in our book about this? Do you know we talked to company presidents? Company presidents who make these nasal sprays. They were all hit by the FDA and the Federal Trade Commission. They were all hit with preemptive strikes. You're illegally advertising. You're illegally marketing. One company said, we want to do research. We just want to apply and get FDA approval. No, you can't do research. You can't do research on a nasal spray in the setting of COVID-19. We had to document in our book. So the books back there, we actually added a chapter. Because if you're self-published, we can do that. There was early on intense U.S. government suppression of early treatment to Americans, and this was mirrored all over the world. From nasal sprays, this is povidone iodine, this is good old betadine. We use it in the emergency room. A few drops or half a teaspoon in a spray bottle, a little water, pinch of salt, spray it up the nose, sniff it back, spit it out, do it twice, gargle with it. Next slide. This is the clinical trial. Now, this was started to be known during 2020. This was January of 2021. A prospective, controlled, randomized trial. This is every bit as good or better than what the NIH CDC would do. What did they show? Look at by day 3, the PCR positivity in the blue bars is dropped dramatically. This was the solution. This is what stopped spread of the virus. The Chinese told us 85% of the spread occurred in the home. How in the world are you going to not spread it to your family members in the home? This is the answer. Virucidal nasal washes. Yet there was no word of it. There was no word of it. Next slide. And in this study where there wasn't really availability of other treatment in Bangladesh, you can see here rates of hospitalization and worse are lowered by a simple nasal wash because the virus is replicating in the nose and that in fact just killing the virus up in the nose. And it works for the common cold as well. This is the most important thing I've learned. When I'm traveling, I carry some of this in my travel bag because you're on a plane, I could start to feel a little viral in the hotel tonight. I'm going to hit this. Very important. For those of you who have not had the illness or you're seniors and you've already been through the illness or expired vaccine status, make sure you know about this. My father is in a nursing home, and I made sure that he has this at the bedside because it keeps, spreading through the nursing home. Make sure mom knows about it. This is very, very important. Everybody should know about virucidal nasal washes, povidone iodine, hydrogen peroxide, clear, colloidal silver, nitric oxide. There's a ton of things that work. The main thing is to do something as opposed to nothing. You cannot allow nasal stuffiness and fever without doing something in the nose. Everybody wants to take pills and shots. It doesn't work. The problem is in the nose. I have so many people contact me, Dr. McCullough, I got a fever, I feel terrible over. It's coming from your nose. The fever is coming from the nose. This is very important. Next slide. Another thing you can do over the counter, it's so easy, famotidine or Pepcid. Pepcid is an antacid, but at high doses, it has antihistamine properties. It may have properties of reducing viral replication. That plus aspirin. In this study from the University of Virginia, one of the best medical schools in the United States, 20,000 people, next slide, there was a 45% reduction in the need for respiratory support. This is so simple. Everybody should have aspirin and famotidine in their house. The doctor may not prescribe anything. You could be in Australia and Canada and you have nothing. People are desperate. Fortunately, we can buy famotidine over the counter. I'm told in Canada it's actually prescription. But make sure you have this. But we use it at 4 times the usual dose, 80 milligrams a day. Next slide. This paper was recently published by Dr. Gougliakis and myself and the late Dr. Zelenko. But we assembled all the clinical studies of early treatment, multi-drug early treatment. And Dr. Gougliakis is a mathematician who ran very detailed probabilistic statistics to try to see, in the absence of a large randomized trial, were we on track? Or could we be completely off? Could there just be selection bias, other things that basically invalidated our approach? And he went through it very methodically. Next slide. Conclusions were, early multi-drug protocols were associated with about 85% reductions in hospitalization and death, with a clear and convincing evidentiary standard by December of 2020. Clear and convincing means that the p-value was less than 0.01. That means the confidence intervals, we could actually use 99% confidence intervals. The conclusion here is incontrovertible. This was not going to be overturned by a large randomized trial, and no large randomized trials are even planned. We had the answer. What he believes and what we believe is we had the answer by December of 2020. Now, I can tell you, I had just testified in the U.S. Senate. By this time, 250,000 Americans had died either of COVID or with COVID. It went on from here, and 750,000 people died after this time point. And I've looked at every report. I looked at a recent survey by Verdkirk and colleagues that showed those who are hospitalized and died did so because they didn't receive early treatment. It had nothing to do with taking a vaccine. It had to do with whether or not they had early treatment. It's clear. There's a paper by Huang and colleagues that showed monoclonal antibodies. 15% of people did get monoclonal antibodies before they're hospitalized, and they survived the hospitalization. But sadly, the 85% who didn't, those were the ones in the group where there were deaths. It's clear. The two things that reduce hospitalization and death are prior infection and early treatment. Has nothing to do with a vaccine. Any paper that tries to claim a vaccine did anything never accounts for those two factors. Next slide. We had an early COVID treatment guide. We had this out by October of 2020. When I look back on it, the alacrity that we operated on to get this to America was astonishing. We were working day and night. Next slide. Vaccines, and that's really where the tension is right now. All of you have been through the illness. Most of you are not worried about another case of COVID. I'm not. But I am the vaccines, and my office is loaded with people who have taken the vaccine, and now there's a problem. Heart damage, blood clot, loved ones who've died, skin rashes, joint pain, autoimmunity. It's incessant. A recent Zogby survey was done, a valid representative survey of the United States. 2/3 of people took the vaccine. Of those 2/3, 85% are fine. They're fine. Wonderful. 15% have a new disease or medical problem they're dealing with. 15%. Recent European Medicine Agency data came out suggesting that large amounts of messenger RNA degrade. It's unstable. It had to be super cool. They gave up on that. It wasn't practical. Then they tried different buffering systems. I'm convinced that a large number of people in the 85% who are fine who have basically gotten a dud. They've gotten very little active messenger RNA. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, because people in our family took it. People in this room took it. Hallelujah. If you're fine, chances are you got a dud. It's all human and manufacturing error. Wonderful. And multi-use files. The 15% who actually got a problem, or sadly, those who died, they did so because they actually got the real thing. They got a good quantity of messenger RNA. It was taken up and it did what it was supposed to. It generated large amounts of the spike protein. We know this because the complications are restricted to specific lots. There's specific lots. It's called hot lots. That's a good term. They're hot. Hot lots. And work by Sasha Ladipova, published in Trial Site News, has it all laid out. Do you know with influenza vaccine, all the complications which are rare are all randomly distributed across the lots, no pattern. But with Pfizer and Moderna, they're loaded in specific lots. You can even look up your lot to see if you got one. So we are praying that all of those who are fine, the 85% are fine, got a relatively inert, injection, okay? But it is a game of Russian roulette. If this keeps going and they go back for a third or a fourth, Dr. Cole said, listen, if you don't take a third. This is very important. It is a Russian roulette, it looks like. And with fewer people taking vaccines, I'm worried the complication rate will go higher. You know why? Because many more fresh vials are going to be opened. It's not going to be a multi-use thing. When everyone's rushing, the nurses are injecting air and giving multiple per day. You go into CVS and Walgreens, go back by the pharmacy area. You know that dark corner in the back where there's a few chairs? There's usually a couple really, really people who look like they don't want to be there. I tell you, that's not very common. Next slide. Here's the pandemic. We're finishing this Omicron afterwave. Very few people in the hospital, if any. At my major medical center, one of the technicians I know really well who runs our ECMO service, I ask him who's in the hospital. Virtually no one. I have one person in the hospital right now who's in with this illness and heart disease. Never called me for early treatment. It's heartbreaking. I have right now in my practice, I probably have 5 getting through it on pretty easy regimens. But we're in this afterwave. By the way, I just recently learned that big narrow peak in December and January, that only happened in countries that were heavily vaccinated. I learned that Scott Youngblood, who's a military physician, did a wonderful presentation in San Diego, and he showed Israel, which has the identical spike, and then he showed Jordan and Lebanon, which didn't have no Omicron spike, and they're right next to each other. Fascinating. Yeah, so check my Twitter feed. I have that up there. Scott Youngblood is terrific. He was a naval officer and physician. Excellent. Next slide. Did Americans take vaccines? You better believe they did. Look at over age 65. These are CDC data. 95%, that's the light colored bar, 95% of Americans took the vaccines at high risk. This was not a problem of noncompliance. This was never a crisis of the unvaccinated. Never. Because all our high-risk people took the vaccines. It was impossible to blame the unvaccinated for this. Look at that. Look at some of the statistics. Like, Hispanics over age 65, they all took it. Next slide. And then these are the big waves of vaccination, as you can see, moving through that initial enthusiasm, people waiting in lines in cars. That second wave was largely the mandate wave, and now we're at an all-time low. There's no enthusiasm for taking vaccines right now. None. Now, I came in by car from the Boise airport a few hours ago, and I rode in with Heidi Ahrens, and I asked the question, is there any vaccine celebration going on the other side of town? Is there a Moderna rally? Is there a Pfizer rally? Is there any community group out there celebrating these vaccines? Is anybody? Nobody. Nobody is celebrating these vaccines. That should tell you something. There's never been a vaccine parade. There's never been a gala ball. They are a menace. I went on with Peter Bregan early, I think in December of 2020. He goes, they're a menace. He goes, they are a menace. And that's a very good description. If they were wonderful things, everybody would be celebrating them, right? Of course they're not wonderful. Next slide. So the injuries and deaths have been concealed, intentionally concealed, as the vaccination program was steamrolled. We deserved monthly safety reports. Big clinical program like this, I've chaired data safety monitoring reports. Minimum would be monthly safety reports. They got to tell us, how's it going? If a problem came up, new allergies, deaths, something else, we need risk mitigation. We couldn't have people take this and then die a few hours or a day or two later. That's absolutely unacceptable. I don't care how good it would be. Unacceptable. Next slide. Well, what have we learned? The rates of damage, this is in Circulation. This is our best cardiology journal. This was just published from the UK. 100 fatal cases of myocarditis in young people. 100 cases, that's what they know about. That's number one on the death certificate. Died of COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis. 100. 100. Dr. Cole heard me. I said it before America in the U.S. Senate. I said 1 case is too many. 1, because children are not affected by this illness, and if they are, they're easily treated. Even kids who are on tracheostomy tubes are easily treated. Next slide. This paper, this is CDC data published in Lancet a few days ago. The kids who get myocarditis, this is over 500, 17% are permanently disabled or damaged. They still have symptoms. They still require medications. You probably heard 48 Hours. Tucker Carlson picked up on this. He showed it. He showed a video from New York Presbyterian Hospital trying to normalize this, and then he had Marty Makary on from Johns Hopkins to nail this down. This myocarditis is not rare. It's not mild. And it's not transient. I have patients in my office now, 14 months, and it's not stopping. I don't know how to stop it. I've tried everything. This is a nightmare for young people to take this vaccine. It is a nightmare. I was on Fox News early, very early on. No young person should take this vaccine. I'm on record. You know, I'm glad I'm on record. I was accused of being an anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist. They held my video up when I was telling Laura Ingraham this. I am so glad I said this. And you know, Denmark agrees. Denmark has basically said no vaccines for young people because of these extraordinary risks and the lack of benefit. Do you know the original clinical trials were examined by Freeman et al. From LSU and Peter Doshi? Even for the randomized trials, they concluded fairly that the vaccines caused more harm than good. Even from the original analyses, if they would have been analyzed correctly, if we would have had a proper process. Next slide. What we've learned is that there's been wide open malfeasance. Next slide. Pfizer knew about 1,223 deaths within 90 days of release of their vaccine. Family members were calling Pfizer saying, my relative just took your vaccine and they died, and Pfizer was recording every death. Within 90 days of release. This is astonishing. And when pressed, Pfizer didn't want to release this information. This is from their documents. And the lawyer for the FDA wanted to block this to Americans for 55 years. This is prima facie evidence. The U.S. FDA, which should be protecting us and should be the guardians of drug safety, in fact, the FDA is complicit in a cover-up. This is a U.S. government operation. This is a U.S. government operation. And they are trying to cover up this. And the press is complicit. Do you know every single press interview that Pfizer CEO Bourla has had? They've never asked him about these deaths. Now, if he went on Tucker Carlson or Laura Ingraham, I bet they'd ask him. Or Rob Schmidt at Newsmax, or Carl Higbie, or Sebastian Gorka, or Steve Dees. I mean, we can go on and on. Listen, there's plenty of fair media people out there. I'm going to be on Newsmax tomorrow morning from Boise. You got to turn in. But it's 5:30 in the morning. So for those of you early risers, get up at 5:30. I'm going to go on with Amanda Brilhanti and Carl Higbie, who are my favorites on the weekend, but it's going to be from my hotel room, but turn on be from Boise. There are fair media, but Bourla will not go on and actually ever receive this question. Yet it occurred. This will go down in history as the largest biological catastrophe and cover-up of a product in human history. By far. Exemption. Pull this report and just attach it to it. That's what I do. So listen, it's not my opinion. It's the opinion of 70 organizations worldwide. These things aren't safe. Next slide. The VAERS report, everyone knows about this. I just want to point out on the left, when you go to open VAERS data, make sure you go up to the top and toggle over to US data, because VAERS also includes some reports from Japan and Germany and then some smaller countries. You always get a bigger number. But the number up top is at the CDC is admitting to 14,129 Americans have died. Now, these are the ones that are reported to the CDC, and 86% of the reports, we know this from prior studies, are done by doctors, nurses, coroners, and paramedics who think the vaccine caused it. And the CDC double checks the death certificate to make sure these die. These are permanent VAERS numbers. Look at the deaths that the CDC knows about. Look when they happen. Look at the bottom. The majority of the deaths occur on the day they take the vaccine or the next day. It's nearly instantaneous. Dr. Cole and I were going across the Florida Panhandle. We stopped at Dunkin' Donuts. Some nice ladies came in. They wanted to take pictures. They took pictures, and one of the ladies said, I want to tell you my story. She goes, a year ago, I took my dad out of senior living, and I took him to get a vaccine. I was told this is the right thing to do. I thought I was doing the right thing. She took him to take the vaccine, and he died in the passenger seat on the way back to the nursing home. That's how it happens. It's that proximal. It's that proximal. On your news feed 48 hours ago, a woman in Saskatoon, Canada, took the booster. She was texting her daughter in the 15-minute waiting period there, and she died. This is important. That means she already took at least 2 prior vaccines, and now the booster is obviously allergenic enough to actually kill. So this idea of having a fatal allergic reaction on the 3rd or 4th or 5th shot is real. So people who think, oh, I took 2 and I did fine, I'm going to be fine for the next one, watch out. There's data from the Israeli military showing the kids can get through 1 or 2 of these, and on the 3rd or 4th, they get myocarditis. We're up to dozens of young Canadian doctors dying on the 4th shot. The human body cannot take accumulating amounts of foreign genetic material coding for the spike protein, and worse than that, accumulating more and more spike protein, the fatal protein, in tissues. Now, all the other things on the report are cohesive, meaning there's a ton of near misses, myocarditis, blood clots. This is all part of what we call causality. It's cohesive. These are the organ injury syndromes on the right. Virtually every organ in the body can be injured because of spike protein and the lipid nanoparticles can be deposited there. Spike protein can be produced. Next slide. Everybody gets polio. These are universally applied. Look how many safety reports there are compared to these more frequently used vaccines. This is not an issue of just so many people took the COVID vaccines. Is that these are uniquely toxic to the human body. Next slide. This paper, Panchazakos and Solomon from Columbia. How bad could it really be? Through December of 2021, next slide, it could be as bad as 187,000 Americans have died. This was using ecological analysis, using U.S. Census data and vaccine administrator. 187,000 Americans through 2021 due to the vaccine. It's possibly that high. We don't know because VAERS is so underreported, right? So if it's 10 to 1 underreporting, that's 140,000. If it's 100 to 1 underreporting, which is in one paper suggests that, that's 1.4 million. This is worse than a war. This is worse than a war. If we actually take all of those lost to COVID that could have been saved and everything we're seeing with the vaccines, and we count up injuries, disabilities, and deaths, COVID-19, the illness, and the vaccine together are worse than all the wars in the history of our country. That's how momentous this time is for us. Next slide. Well, do the vaccines do anything? Do they do anything? There have been 4 false claims on these vaccines. Let's get them out. Next slide. The first one is the vaccines prevent infection. There were thousands of breakthrough cases in the spring of 2021. The CDC was overwhelmed. May 1st of 2021, the CDC says we are no longer going to track these breakthroughs. Then our CDC director came out a month or 2 later and says they don't stop transmission. Fully vaccinated people were spreading to fully vaccinated people. The final one was, well, there's a consolation prize, that they reduce hospitalization and death. The only mechanism by which they can reduce hospitalization and death is actually reduce the incidence of the binary occurrence of the illness. And then the data started to pour in from Israel, South Africa, Australia, Canada, the UK, more people hospitalized who've been fully vaccinated than the unvaccinated. And the only papers that claim the vaccines reduced hospitalization and death were those who never accounted for early treatment. I can tell you my vaccinated patients are the first ones to get early treatment. They never account for that, and they never account for prior infection. So they don't account for the most important confounders. And lastly, there's never been a randomized trial where hospitalization and death were the primary endpoint in a vaccine trial versus placebo, or even a secondary endpoint where the vaccines reduced hospitalization and death. It's never been shown. The FDA has never been granted that claim. So for any public health agency to come out and say, take a vaccine, it's going to reduce your chances of dying, they are actually in violation of and going beyond an FDA claim. If this was a drug on the market, the drug company couldn't make that claim. Drug companies can't claim things that drugs don't do. Yet our public health officials are claiming the vaccines reduce hospitalization and death. And the last claim I anticipate is that they're going to say, well, it's going to prevent COVID from coming back. Take your shots, and it's going to prevent them from coming back. The most incoherent thing happened a few weeks ago where White House Coordinator Jha, NIAID Director Fauci, CDC Director Walensky, and Health and Human Services Becerra got on a 4-person conference. And they said, well, you can get your COVID-19 booster and your flu shot at the same time. And it's going to be annual. Wait a minute. The COVID vaccines only last 6 months. How can it be annual? Think about the incongruence of this. Do you know at the Canadian border, they say you have to get a vaccine to get in the border. They're really concerned about this. Well, is it a vaccine within the last 6 months, or is it a vaccine at any time? Oh, just any time. The vaccines only last 6 months. Again, it's incoherent. Even those who are espousing the vaccines, they're incoherent. They're not making sense. The human mind's not thinking correctly. Next slide. Well, the vaccine manufacturers have railroaded these projects through the FDA while raking in pre-purchased revenue. This has been the worst thing ever. We should never allow our governments to buy something before it's been tested, before it's been proven. We should pay as we go. This is wide open. That's the reason why in our book, my co-author John Leake and we coined this term biopharmaceutical complex. There is a syndicate now, and they figured it out, that they can basically, in the context of a health emergency, convince governments to purchase products ahead of time before there's any proof that the products are safe or effective. It's a cartel. It's a syndicate. It's a biopharmaceutical complex. Next slide. Well, these latest COVID-19 boosters, Dr. Cole told you, they were approved before any human testing. I can tell you, I've testified before the FDA. I've chaired data safety monitoring boards, dozens of them. We would never allow a pill to be swallowed by anybody unless it went through exhaustive human testing to make sure it's safe and effective. Our government and our government agencies are unmoored. By this act and all the ones we've outlined today, they're untrustable at this point in time. This is malfeasance. This is wrongdoing. From a regulatory perspective, this can be linked to any type of civil law. This is illegal. No one can put a product on the market without it going through human testing. Next slide. 8 mice. In 8 mice, what was shown is the vaccines don't even work. In these mice, they got COVID-19, and it was similar to the unboosted product right next to it. It didn't work. It did not work in animal studies. It was never going to work in human studies. There is zero chance these boosters are going to do any good in a human being. Zero chance. Zero. And that poor woman in Canada is a testament of how much harm they can do. Next slide. These are the antibody responses. You probably couldn't even tell which one is the new product. They're about the same. It doesn't work. Antibody levels are unreliable as an indicator of a clinical outcome. This is malfeasance. Do you know the current head of the FDA is a friend of mine? I went skiing with him for 15 years from Duke University. He prides himself on large randomized clinical trials. It's him and his group that failed to meet with Ernesto Ramirez. Something is wrong in the minds of people. Very wrong. Very wrong. And every so often you can see somebody break out of it. Recently, one of the FDA officials said, listen, I can't go along with this. I can't go along with this. One of the FDA officials early on, when the false claim that they were FDA approved, when that false claim came out in the summer of 2021, Dr. Gruber said, I resign. I can't go along with this. They're not FDA approved. And even went up to President Biden, Pfizer's FDA approved. She knew it was wrong. It's wrongdoing by those in position of authority. Malfeasance. Next slide. And the false claims keep going. This is Oregon. This is close to you guys. The false claims keep going. I recently pulled this down from their website. Look at the first claim. The new boosters is the best way to protect yourself from severe illness and hospitalization. It's never been tested in humans. Even the old vaccines didn't do this. Next slide. It's false. How about the next claim? It protects against the original strain and the Omicron variants. It doesn't. I showed you the animals get equally as sick without the new booster. Arrow forward, next one. Third claim, it's safe and effective and can be given at the same time as a flu shot. No, it's never been tested in human beings to begin with. It has all kinds of acute reactions. You saw thousands of people have died on the first day. Giving a flu shot's not going to make it any safer. It's going to make it worse in those with allergies. Aaron Rodgers told Joe Rogan, he goes, I have a polyethylene glycol allergy. I'm not taking the vaccine. That's what he told the Packers. Everybody beat him up on it. Oh, everyone told him he did it. He was a bad guy for doing it. Deion Sanders, who used to play for Cowboys, said, oh, he's a bad guy. Aaron Rodgers is a bad guy. Vaccine discrimination. I went on TV. I said, Aaron Rodgers, with his intelligence, saved himself. Aaron Rodgers could have been like the lady in Canada. He could have been a death in the vaccine center. That's how it goes. And that's how it went. That poor man that Ryan and I heard about in Florida, that's what happened. He probably died of a fatal reaction within an hour or two of taking the shot. These fatal reactions cannot be underestimated. It's happened in thousands of people. Thousands of people. Next slide. This letter just went from 47 members of Congress to Lloyd Austin, Department of Defense Secretary. You know what it says? It says the grave effect of these vaccines on the military it is so deleterious, it's reducing our readiness and our military's ability to fight and win wars. We urge you to immediately revoke your COVID-19 vaccine mandates for all service members, civilian personnel, and contractors, and reinstate those who've been discharged. Give these guys a round of applause. Now that's 47. We need 347. But it's happening. People are finally starting to get the courage. And if you were to ask each one of these, why didn't you do this a year or two ago? If they were honest, they would say, you know what, I didn't have the courage. I didn't have the courage. I didn't feel like I could do it. Dr. Cole and I meet countless numbers of people who want to take pictures and they want to, have all this fanfare and what have you. And I asked them, I said, listen, you're so influential. Why don't you speak out? And do you know what they say? They say, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. I've heard that from Hollywood movie stars, pro athletes, people who just their lives are perfect. They can't be hurt at all. They're afraid. There's some type of fear in the air. And the unique thing is we don't have it. We don't have it. I bet none of you were afraid, ever. I wasn't. Were you afraid? I was never afraid. My wife was never afraid. She got COVID. First thing she said, all 110 pounds of her, she goes, is that it? Is that it? Is this what they've been talking about? Is this what? Next slide. So to finish and conclude, I want to say, listen, that we have a strong position. End all lockdowns, restrictions. They can't come back to Europe. We've got to help our friends. We need to test only on label. Acutely sick person, I have no problem getting a COVID-19 test. In fact, I think there's so many extra tests laying around, we should get an antigen and a PCR test at a low cycle threshold, less than 28, and confirm that we got the real deal. We should recognize prior infection in all applications. Those of you who are running small businesses, if you're going to ask the question, it's not about the vaccine, is that do you want to know, did they have the illness? If you have a relative call you from Seattle and they said, I've got COVID, what should I do? Your first question is, have you had it before? That's your first question. If you've had it before, you can reassure them, listen, it's going to be mild, you can get through it. Most of the second infections, I don't need to prescribe a single drug. It's that easy. We need to treat COVID-19 early and high risk. There are some senior citizens who's going to sweep through again, and we need to be ready, and we need to be advocates for treatment, okay? We need to drop the vaccine mandates, period. Pause current products. They have to go. In fact, in Boise, why doesn't everybody in this room go figure out who's got a vaccine mandate going? A school, an employer. Why don't you make some calls? Your first question is, who decided this? Who has the courage to come out and defend this vaccine mandate? Call them out. Make them uncomfortable. Let them know what you think. Let them know what you think. They're immoral. They're unethical. And they are, from a civil perspective, illegal. They're illegal. I've testified in military court, and I've had these JAG officers that are trying to make the case that the young military servicemen need to take the vaccine. And I spend a lot of time with them. I describe what the vaccine does in the body. And I look right at them. If I was in court, I'd be laser on them. And I'm talking to the attorneys. You know why? Because they took the vaccine themselves. And I watch them sweat. I watch them start to tremble. I watch the fear in their eyes. I told one time, I said, I want Lloyd Austin. I want him in front of me. I want him in front of me. They work for us. We have forgotten this. They all work for us. And the bottom line is, no one feels good about taking these things. No one does. No one does. And you know what? People in my family took it, in my circles, and many times early, and there's regret. And I tell them, listen, I think if it's beyond a year, I'm not seeing the emergence of things. Dan Bongino has me on all the time on Fox. Dan has come out and publicly said, as somebody who has an indolent lymphoma, he's been very open about this. Dan said, taking the 3 shots is the biggest mistake of my life. And we have to be ready for this. People are going to wake up now and start to really have terror. And I told them, I'm following my patients carefully. I can't predict everything, but I do think people have gotten it beyond a year based on this rationale that I've given you. I think they're going to be okay. Honestly, through good fortune and a lot of other mechanisms, they're going to be okay. I don't think it's right to portray doom and gloom for every person. But the key thing is to not keep taking more. I'm going to finish with one final statement that stuck in my mind, and I thought it was so wonderful because this issue of so many people took the vaccines. 2/3 of Americans. And I told you, I showed you the data. Over 65, 95% of people took them. And I was on Daystar. Anybody here watch Daystar? It's wonderful. It's the world's largest Christian broadcasting network. And I've been on 4 times with each show. They run reruns. We hit about 1.7 billion people. It's a massive audience worldwide. And Joni Lamb, who's the surviving spouse of Marcus Lamb, who died in Dallas of COVID, you know what Joni Lamb says about the vaccines and all the people who take the vaccines? She said, God is bigger than a vaccine. Yes. Yes. It's almost as if there's an opportunity for redemption every 6 months. Think about that. Every 6 months, there's an opportunity for redemption. So let's call it. Let's encourage others to just end this. And I think if the vaccine program ends with people saying no, and having everyone make their efforts to restore to normalcy, this very, very dark time in America can end and we can move on. Thank you so much for having me come. Be on Amazon. Just go to the website, courageforthose.com.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCullough, for that. It's definitely inspiring to see men who have been pressured the way that he's been pressured.